Welcome to the Springs in the Desert podcast. We're those friends that you can take with you wherever you are on the path of infertility. Hey listeners, this is Jillian. I just wanted to let you know that this episode contains a personal story, a personal testimony of a woman who had a high-risk pregnancy, and it entails a story of quite a bit of medical trauma. And so if this is not a story that you are prepared to listen to at this moment, that's okay. We just encourage you to hit pause, and you can go back and listen to a different episode and come back to this at a later time if that's what you would like to do. But I do truly think that this episode is relatable to so many different seasons of infertility. So if you're at a space that you are able to listen to this episode, then I encourage you to do so, and we would love to hear from you afterwards. Thank you so much for being here, and it's an honor to walk with you. Hey there, welcome back to the Springs in the Desert podcast. I'm Jillian, your host, and I'm really excited today to be talking with you with a new team member and someone that you're going to get to know very dearly, not only through this podcast, but through several other avenues in the Springs community. I have Katie Axelson today. How are you, Katie?
Good. How are you?
I'm so good. Listeners, this episode is going to be the start of a series of stories. We hear from you all the time that you really appreciate hearing personal stories because it helps you identify and process your own and see where God is working in your own story, wherever you are on the path of infertility. And Katie has been so generous to share her story. And I've heard bits and pieces, but I cannot wait to have it all together and to hear her heart. So I think we should just dive right in, Katie. Could you, first of all, introduce yourself a little bit and then just start wherever you would like with your story and how it relates to Springs? Maybe when did you get married and where did your journey of infertility begin?
Yeah. So my husband and I have been married it'll be 7 years this November. We got married pretty young. I was 21 when we got married and a very recent convert to the Catholic faith. Very fresh. I had no faith background at all when I met my husband. And it was like a whirlwind of God really, truly coming after my heart in a very intentional way. And yeah, I knew before we got married that I had some hormonal issues going on. My cycles were really just not regular. So we knew that we would likely have some issues conceiving. So in marriage prep, we met with the Creighton educator, and there were some red flags that initially popped up. And she recommended that we get into a NAPRO doctor, that I do that before getting married so that we can get the ball rolling and getting my hormones checked out. So we got married and we wanted to start a family right away. And I got into our local NAPRO doctor fairly quickly after we got married. There was a pretty long wait list after like the initial call.
Yes, I think that unfortunately is fairly common. Yeah.
Yeah. So we got in and they're like, there's definitely some red flags here. I was going like 70 days without a cycle, having significant amounts of pain. I would have 2 weeks out of every month where I wasn't like in a lot of pain. So they recommended that we move forward with a surgery to see if there's endometriosis going on or what it looks like internally. So we got married in November and I had that surgery in August. And I was diagnosed with endometriosis and PCOS. They weren't anticipating PCOS at first because my initial hormone levels, other than progesterone deficiency, looked fairly good, but my ovaries were very polycystic in appearance. And they recommended that we try to conceive pretty quickly after the surgery. And we found out we were pregnant with our daughter the first cycle after. And it just felt like a major answer to prayers, because also that month our local NAPRO doctor was leaving and we weren't going to have a NAPRO doctor locally anymore. So it just really felt like a God moment for us. Okay, God really came through for us here. I needed progesterone injections from the get-go. My progesterone was very low and we were really excited. Everything was great. And then at 7 weeks, the night before my sister-in-law's wedding, actually, I started bleeding. And I was very high risk for ectopic pregnancy and I hadn't had a scan yet. So they had us go to the hospital just to make sure everything looked okay. And they diagnosed me with a subchorionic hemorrhage. So I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's basically like a little bruise or like a blood clot behind the placenta. There's typically no big deal. They're very common. This was really small. They're like, this isn't an issue at all. You'll probably bleed for a little bit. It'll resolve. No big deal. You don't need to do bed rest, nothing like that. So we're like, okay, great. This is the best news possible. We were expecting worst case scenario. So we go on with the weekend and I just keep bleeding heavier and heavier. So I get into my OB on like Monday or Tuesday. And same thing, they do a scan. They're like, yep, no big deal. It's 2 centimeters, really small. We're not super worried about it. Just call us if anything gets worse. And then in the middle of the night, I started bleeding very heavily. They got us right back in the next day, and the subchorionic hemorrhage had tripled in size overnight. So it went from like 1 to 2 centimeters to 7 or 8 centimeters. And they're like, okay, this is a bigger deal now. You're bleeding really heavily. We want you on very strict bed rest, because every time I would get up, I would just start to bleed. And they had us come in 2 days later and it had grown to 12 centimeters. And they said, and my HCG had plateaued. There was still a heartbeat, but my HCG wasn't rising. We had this bleeding, and they said, we want to prepare you that it's really likely you're going to miscarry. The blood clot's too large. It's going to push the baby out. So in the meantime, we want you to do very strict bed rest. They said they didn't want me up for more than 5 minutes a day to try and minimize the blood loss. And only get up to grab food, go to the bathroom. That's it. Otherwise, we want you laying down. So that's what we did. And we came home and we went and got a special blessing with some relics at one of our local churches. We just gave it to God, and we really turned to the Our Father. And that's a really big theme with our story, is the Our Father. And I remember this was again leading into a weekend. So I ordered, I'm wearing it. I wear it every day. I've worn it every day since. It's a bracelet and it says, "Thy will be done." And that just became a really big theme for us with this, was thy will be done, whatever that may be. And every time we would go in for a scan, there would be a heartbeat and she would still be fighting. And we had been praying for specifically the intercession of Saint Philomena. The entire process, it took us about a year to conceive her. So we were praying for the intercession of Saint Philomena that entire time. I had a dream when we were engaged that we would have a little girl. And in the dream, I delivered her and they put her in my arms. And I remember looking down at her and I'm like, this is Philomena. And so we knew if we ever had a little girl, her name would be Philomena. So we knew when we were trying to conceive, this is the saint we need to pray. We need to pray for her intercession. So it's amazing to see how much of a fighter our daughter is. Even from 7 weeks pregnant, she was hanging on in like dire circumstances. And every time we'd go to an appointment, and I was going for a while there, I was going twice a week for them to really keep up on the bleeding, to pay close attention to it. And every time we'd go, there would be a heartbeat, and the pregnancy, thanks be to God, kept progressing, and my HCG started rising again. And it really felt like a miracle. And I was on bed rest up until about 22 weeks like that. And then the bleeding slowed and the hemorrhage resolved. And eventually I passed it. And we were like, this is great. This is the miracle we've been asking for. And then at 26 weeks, my blood pressure skyrocketed. It was like 60 over something. And my doctor was concerned. She had me go in. They gave me fluids. They're like, I really don't think anything's wrong. Maybe it's just stress. And then 2 days later, this was February 22nd. I was laying in bed and I rolled over and I felt a pop and then a gush. And I was like, oh no, did I just pee my pants or did my water break? Like, there's no way my water broke. My husband, at the time, we were opening the restaurant that we run. It was like we were putting ovens in and getting everything set up. So he was there and I was at home alone. And I'm like frantically Googling. I'm like, okay, how do I know if this was my water or if it was pee before I go to the hospital? Because at that point, we'd been to the doctor and the hospital so many times for issues that I was like, I don't want to go unless it's seriously an emergency. So I went and I was like, I'm gonna test the pH. I got pH strips and I'm like, I'm gonna see. And it like came back positive. And I'm like, nah, it's just a faulty strip. No way. So then I call my aunt and my mom and I'm like, maybe not. So they come over and they're sitting with me while we're trying to decide if I want to go in. And I call my doctor and they're like, this is like a maybe 5% chance that your water broke this early. I'm sure it's fine. Unless you start having contractions, I think it's okay to wait and see. And then as soon as I got off the phone, the contractions started and the bleeding started again. So we get to the hospital and still haven't called my husband. And they're like, they get me in a room and they test it and they're like, yeah, your water is broken. They do a sonogram and we find out it's a complete rupture. So you can sometimes, when your water breaks, it can tear a little bit, like at the top, and there's a chance for it to reseal. Mine was a complete rupture of membranes. I had 1 or 2 centimeters of measurable fluid left. By the time I got to the hospital, I was losing so much fluid that it was obvious it was my water. And I finally call my husband and I'm like, I'm at the hospital. My water broke. You probably should come up here now. And they let us know that they would be admitting me to the hospital until I delivered the baby. And that they were going to give me magnesium first of all, it helps with preventing brain like hemorrhages in premature infants, but it also can help calm the uterus with contractions. But they did let us know that if my body showed signs of wanting to go into labor, they weren't going to stop it because there's so many risks of infection. So I was contracting pretty regularly. Philomena was not handling them well. Her heart rate kept dropping. They would run into the room and flip me and like all these things. But about 24 hours later, the contraction stopped and I wasn't making any changes. Like I wasn't dilating. So they moved me to antepartum. And the plan was to hopefully make it to 34 weeks, which is when they would induce me, because at that point it would be safer for Philomena. She'd have a better chance of surviving and they wouldn't be prolonging the risk of infection for me. So I was on antepartum and they do heart rate checks and contraction checks 3 times a day, all day long. If you get up to go to the bathroom, you have to immediately call them. They have to come check the baby's heartbeat. It was even stricter bed rest than before. We were getting weekly scans with maternal fetal just to check on like placenta, baby, fluid levels, all the things. I was really fortunate. There was a nun who I got really close with. Her name is Sister Carmela. She would bring me the Eucharist every day and we would talk about life, faith, Philomena, all the things. It was really beautiful. And during this time, I think God was really preparing me for what was to come because I really dove into my faith like I hadn't before. My prayer life was really healthy. I was praying the Memorare like pretty much just on repeat constantly all day long, just asking Our Lady to help me through this. And there were some really beautiful moments with it. I was terrified of being like lonely in a hospital. I was like, I'm going to be alone in this hospital. And that was like a silly fear because God sent me a visitor every single day. Even when I didn't know I would have a visitor coming, someone would knock on my door and here would come in a family friend to say hi and to see how I was. And it was just, God really provided for us in that suffering. And then at 31 weeks, I started having very strong, very regular contractions. And they realized that I was in labor and that at that point, they don't try to stop the labor with medications because they say they want to listen to the woman's body that there may be a serious infection going on because I'd been in the hospital for so long without any fluid. There was nothing protecting Philomena. I was a little bit dilated, nothing crazy. So I went into labor and she handled it well. And I think I was in labor for 48 hours. She was so small that I wasn't making changes. So it took a little while to get her out. And when she was here, she was born at 3:14 and she came out and she cried, which is great for a preemie. She was doing well. They had to intubate her. She didn't have any surfactant, but all things considered, she was doing really well. And they put her before me so I could see her at least, even though she was this little teeny tiny little peanut. She was 4 pounds, 1 ounce on April Fool's Day. So she was 401. And her birthday is always really funny to us because I'm like, you really lived up to that, kiddo. Yeah. And the NICU had talked to us before we had her and they gave us all the statistics for every week. And they're like, we knew 31 weeks, they're like the big kids in the NICU. They usually do really well. So we were prepared for that. My husband went with Philomena to the NICU and my mom stayed with me. And the plan was that an hour after delivery, as long as everything was going okay, then I could go down to the NICU and see Philomena. And about an hour after delivery, I was pumping. I should actually back up. After she was delivered, the placenta wasn't coming out. And it came out in shredded pieces. So instead of delivering an entire placenta, I was just passing pieces of placenta. So they did a bedside D&C. and they were pretty sure that they had gotten everything. But I was bleeding a little bit too much the whole time. So from them me delivering the placenta to when I'm like pumping about an hour after. And when I was pumping, I started contracting really strongly again. And my contractions the entire time had always been in my back. They were never really in my stomach too bad. The significant pain was in my back in a very specific spot. And at the time I thought it was just, this is back labor. Everybody goes through this. Well, not everybody, but a lot of women do. So that contraction started up again. And I let them know, I'm like, this is the pain is really high again, like it was in active labor. And I no longer had my epidural. And they're like, okay, you're bleeding a little bit more than we would like, nothing crazy. But if that contraction ever starts and then doesn't stop, you need to let us know right away. And then a few minutes later, that happened. It was like, just like this super strong grip, like inside something internally is what it felt like. And it was extremely painful. And then I started massively hemorrhaging. And it was like a whirlwind. They pulled the emergency cord and people started running into the room. And here comes the resident. And my husband was in the restroom. And they don't even tell me what they're doing. They just start a manual evacuation. So they're manually trying to remove what they thought was retained placenta. And they keep doing it. And my husband comes out and I am like hysterical. And every time the doctor would try to remove the placenta, she would hit that area of my uterus. And it was the worst pain you could possibly imagine, like a contraction times 50. So I started screaming. I don't even really remember screaming, but my family heard me screaming out in the waiting room. And I had made it very clear that my priority was to get to Philomena. I did not want to be put to sleep for a DNC. And the resident knew that. And she said, I can get this out. You can handle anything for 60 seconds. If we put you to sleep, it's going to be 5 hours before you can see your baby. So I let her keep trying. And this went on for about 30 minutes. And I was hemorrhaging the whole time. And a nurse actually pulled my mom aside and she said, she needs to go back for surgery or she is going to die. You have to insist that they call her actual doctor and that they do a surgery. So my mom did, she insisted, and my actual doctor came. They did the DNC and they removed what they thought was retained placenta. But when they tried to inflate the like brachy balloon, it wouldn't stay inflated. So they had to pack my uterus with gauze. So they sent me off to recovery and I didn't wake up. I wasn't waking up. And my family was getting more increasingly concerned. They're like, why isn't she waking up? It's been hours. This is not normal. And they just said, it's just anesthesia. She's been through a lot. It might take a while. And then I started to wake up enough to say, there's something wrong. I'm still having the cramping. I'm having a lot of pain. I think I'm bleeding. And the nurses were like, you're not bleeding, honey. Everything is fine. Because when they would do the like fundal check, everything felt normal because of the gauze. They couldn't tell that I was still actively bleeding. So hours went by and externally it looks like I'm sleeping and my family was still just really concerned. They feel like something is wrong. And internally I am conscious but unable to move my body. I can't move my hands. I can't open my eyes. I can't talk. I knew something was seriously wrong. And I could hear my family and the nurses talking around me. And I would like just build up just enough strength to say, something's wrong. I can't breathe. And the nurse kept telling me, it's just your anxiety, honey. You're fine. There's nothing wrong. You're fine. But eventually it got to the point where my blood pressure started dropping. And again, my family brought up concerns. They're like, there's something wrong. And the nurse was like, I think the blood pressure cuff just isn't reading it properly. And she turned the machine off. And then eventually my blood pressure got to around, it was somewhere in the range of 40/20, which is critically low. Like that's very low blood pressure. So my mom insisted that she basically told them, either you're calling her doctor, or I'm calling her doctor. So they got the resident in there and they went to check what was happening. And when they removed, there was a piece of gauze and they removed the gauze and it was all of the blood that I had been bleeding for hours just came out. And it was like literally a scene from a movie. The doctor jumped up, ran out of the room. People started flooding into the room again. My blood pressure was still dropping. I wasn't stable enough for surgery. They got trauma nurses in there to start getting IVs going for blood product because I had 2 IVs in, but I was losing blood faster than they could put it in. It took 2 hours for 2 trauma nurses to find a vein open enough to start more IVs. They had to bring in a vein finder. That didn't work. Then they had to bring in a sonogram machine before they finally were able to find veins open enough and to get the IV started, to get the blood product going so that I could go to surgery. And like all this time, they're like milking the bags of fluids to try and keep my veins open and blood going. Eventually, they were getting me stable for surgery. And before all of this, I had told my husband, I need a priest. I need our priest here. I think I'm dying and I need a priest. So he was frantically calling around trying to get a hold of a priest because for some reason our Catholic hospital did not have a priest on call. This one day of the month that they don't have a priest on call is the day that this is happening. And so one of the other OBs that was at the hospital that day is also a parishioner at our church. And he was able to get a hold of someone who could get a hold of our priest. And he was like, you have a parishioner, she's in trouble, you need to get up here. So our priest was able to get up there just in the nick of time, which was a miracle too, that he was able to get there in time. So when all of this is happening, I'm waiting for the priest to get there. We're waiting for the blood products to work. The worst part of everything was I was incredibly thirsty. Like my throat was closing because there was no fluid left in my body. So it was like I was literally like choking on air. Like I would try to breathe and I couldn't take a breath in because there was nowhere for it to go. So I'm like begging them to let me have water. And they're like, you can't have water, you're going to surgery. And so they let my aunt dip a wash rag into a cup and just touch it to my tongue just enough so that I could take a breath. And then they would touch it to my tongue and then I'd take a breath. And the physical struggle happening with the blood loss was immense. Like I was in complete hemorrhagic shock. My doctor later told us I was at the point where my organs were starting to shut down. I am lucky I didn't go into a coma. It was very critical. So our priest gets there as they're getting me ready to transport me to the OR. And at this point, I couldn't move. Like I could open my eyes a little bit, but I could barely move my body. I was so weak. So he comes in and he starts to do the anointing. And I remember trying to make the sign of the cross with him and I couldn't lift my arm. And as soon as he touched my head with the oils, I smelled the most beautiful smell you could possibly imagine. It was like chrism oil mixed with roses and just like fresh. And it was like life breathed back into my body. And I could make the sign of the cross and I could talk and I could move. And my entire family was there and I could hold my husband's hand again. And he was able to walk with me to the OR, and it was truly miraculous. And at the time, I thought, oh, this is just what the anointing oils smell like. But I later found out that they don't have a smell. Only the chrism oil has a smell. And I realized, okay, that was a God moment. That was Mother Mary there with me. So they get me back to the OR, and my doctor, she was like rubbing my leg and like telling me like, I'm not going to let you die, honey. We're not going to let you die. And I can remember the OR perfectly. Like she was standing like where she was standing, where the nurses were standing. And I remember the anesthesiologist saying, who's going to prep her throat? And right when a nurse started like pushing on my throat, it was like everything slowed down. And I could feel the devil presenting my sins. Look at everything you've done. You are not worthy to me, God. You're not. How could you stand before him when your soul looks like this? And I could see the way my sins had affected me. And I could clearly see that I had not done enough for God. And it was terrifying. Like I was legitimately, it wasn't that I was scared to die. It was that I was scared to go before Jesus as I was. And My prayer the entire time during this, I was praying the entire time I couldn't talk, the entire time I couldn't move. I was just praying Our Fathers and Hail Marys and just asking God to not let me die. I wanted to meet my daughter. I wanted to actually be able to hold her. I hadn't even held her yet. But in that moment, my prayers changed. It was me begging Our Lady to ask God to give me another chance because I hadn't done enough for her son yet. And I wanted that opportunity to do more for him. And I knew if I died then, I would never get it. And as I'm just praying with everything I have in my soul, and I start to feel the medicine like literally crawl through my body. And then I fall asleep and I wake up in the ICU. And they tell me, you lost a lot of blood. We were able to save your uterus, which was a miracle too. And they let me know you're going to be in the ICU for a while. They were like saying like 24 hours. And I'm like, okay, like just shocked, first of all, that I'm alive, and also shocked that they were able to keep my uterus. And they allowed my husband and my parents, my sisters to come in and see me. And then I fell back asleep, obviously, anesthesia. And I woke up a little bit later and was a little bit more clear-headed. And I was like, okay, I get to see my baby. What do I have to do to get out of this ICU? You need to walk, you need to go to the bathroom, you need to eat something. And once you can do all of those things well, then we'll let you leave the ICU. And I did all of it, and I got out of the ICU in 5 hours.
Wow.
I was like, I am going to see my baby today. So I got to see Philomena that afternoon. I think it was probably around 5 o'clock. My sister-in-law came up to help my husband get me to the NICU, and Philomena's doing awesome. She had some normal complications that preemies would have. She had Brady's, where your heart rate and your oxygen dip, things like that, just not being a fully mature newborn. She was in the NICU until May when we were able to bring her home. And everything that happened didn't really hit me until months later. It was just a very like adrenaline rush, like Philomena's in the NICU. I am healing. We're trying to get her healthy so she can come home. And it didn't really hit me all of the spiritual things that happened during her delivery. It really sat with me later, that everything that I was allowed to experience. And at the time, for a while, I was really angry that everything happened the way it did. We were told you can't try for another baby for a while. It would put your life at major risk and the baby's life at major risk. I'm very high risk for uterine rupture, another premature rupture of membranes. I'm high risk for another accreta, which I guess I didn't mention. That is what I had. I had placenta accreta. It had, my placenta had grown almost all the way through my uterus when they had to go in and remove it. And that's why I was bleeding so heavily. It was an undiagnosed accreta, which is when they're undiagnosed, there's a very high maternal death rate with this complication. Typically, they're not seen in first-time pregnancies. So that's why it really wasn't on my doctor's radar. I didn't have any risk factors for it. I'd never had a C-section, obviously, which is usually what causes this type of complication. So it was just really unlikely that would be the complication that I would have. So I'm high risk for all of these things. And we started trying a couple years after, it was a year after Philomena was born. We got the go ahead to start trying again. And we've been trying since then. It's been 4.5 years now. And we just can't stay pregnant. I have obviously had a lot of trauma to my uterus. And all of the different doctors I have, they just don't know if conceiving is something that I'm going to be able to do again, or to be able to actually carry a baby to term or even to viability. There's just so much unknown about the structure of my uterus at this point. And we were grateful for the opportunity that there's even a chance that we can have another baby, because at the time of everything, my doctor had told my husband, best case scenario, if she survives, is a hysterectomy. So just the fact that she was able to save my uterus was a beautiful gift from her and from God. So on this journey of really sitting with everything that happened in her delivery, I can really see now that I'm more far removed from it, the way God used that suffering to heal so many wounds for me. The hardest part of that year, that first initial year of not being able to conceive, is I was really young still, and my faith was still really being formed. I was very newly Catholic. And in my mind, it's okay. I see all of these women getting pregnant, and I'm not getting pregnant, and I don't understand why. Like, why am I not worthy of a baby? And I just had this really deep sense of unworthiness that really needed to be healed. And 5 years ago, I never would have thought that immense suffering would be what healed that sense of unworthiness. But with everything that happened, especially for me, the thirst that I experienced from the blood loss was horrifically painful. And I am now so grateful that I was allowed to experience that, because I know that is likely what Jesus experienced on the cross with his blood loss. He cried out in thirst, and obviously he thirsts. Then that thirst for us, but he also was quite literally thirsty from the blood loss. That was part of his suffering. And to be allowed to experience even a fraction, a tiny bit of his passion, I know that I would do everything 10 times over again. I would happily die for my child, and I would go through even more suffering if it meant she went through less in the NICU. So to know that I would be willing to do that in my limited human capacity for love, how much must he love me for what he endured on the cross? And it really healed the wound of feeling unworthy. And I don't think that would have been as fully healed as it is now had I not experienced what I experienced. And I've learned over time that our suffering is really, truly, it's hard, but it's such a gift, because we can't grow in holiness without it. I never would have learned how to so deeply depend upon God without having had that experience. And now, with the infertility journey we're going through again, I have so much peace knowing that God is completely in control. It's in his hands. It's not my will, it's his. And if his will is not for us to have children, then so be it. I desire his will more than my own, because he is perfect and I am not. And if he's perfect, then his will must be also. And it may hurt, it may be hard, but there's comfort in relinquishing the control, to not have this idea that I have to do something or be something to have a child. That's gone, because it's not up to me. It's up to him. And if our family is meant to grow, we know that he will grow it in the way that he sees fit. And we wouldn't have gotten to the place that we're at now, spiritually, emotionally, without having had to suffer the things that we've suffered. And it really prepared us too for things that would happen in the future. Philomena, her lungs were so underdeveloped. We had multiple instances where she stopped breathing. We had 2 instances where she stopped breathing at home, where we had to call an ambulance. She was readmitted to the hospital, to the ICU, respiratory distress. She almost had to be re-intubated one time. She, a few years ago, went septic with a kidney infection. Back in the ICU, she was very sick. And without having been prepared the way we were to really, truly rely on God in those moments, it would have been 10,000 times harder to not have that faith that God is in control and he will do what is best and he will provide in the moment when we need it. He will truly provide for you, and he will give you the grace you need to endure when it's necessary. Not a moment sooner, not a moment later. It'll happen when you need it. He's really, truly there in the present moment with you. So there's no reason to worry, because he's gonna come through. So we are immensely grateful. And I never thought I would have said that 5 years ago, that I would be grateful to have gone through, but we really, truly are, because it really has prepared us for everything else that's happened in our life and our marriage. And it's been a really beautiful journey. It wasn't my reaction to everything immediately after was not what it is now. Like I said, I was angry and I was having a hard time, and I was really struggling with feeling God's presence in the Eucharist or through prayer. I was just struggling. And it took years of just really praying and allowing God to actually enter into those feelings. Like, instead of hiding them from him, once I started giving them to him, like really letting him work on them, that's when the transformation started to happen with my outlook on our experience and the way we handle suffering now compared to how we handled it 5 years ago. It's really been a beautiful gift from God, the way he's shown us how he can transform pain. He takes our sufferings and our wounds, and he truly does turn it into something beautiful. And we really like to think about anything that happens here on earth. We may not see the fruits of it now, but we're going to see the fruits of it in heaven. And pain might not pass, but it will be redeemed. And it's just such a great comfort to know that we have such a loving Father who does that for us. And like I said, to just know, to really, truly be able to mostly grasp how deep his love for each and every one of us goes. And he's with all of us who are walking any type of heavy cross like that. He's there in the trenches with you. And I've really learned too, it's not something that he's doing to us. It's something that he's allowing to happen. And when you really change your thinking on that it's not something, you're not being punished. It's not something that he's doing to you. We live in a broken world with sin, as unfortunate as that is. And he is going to take the brokenness and he's going to turn it into something beautiful. And yeah, we wouldn't have been able to really fully grasp that without having experienced what we experienced.
Katie, first of all, just thank you so much for sharing all the pieces of your story. And I think that you have insight into so many of the different experiences that women and couples in this community have experienced on the path of infertility. Not only were you having hormonal difficulties prior to marriage and working with doctors and trying to figure that out and through marriage prep, and then having almost a year of infertility before you were able to conceive Philomena. And then you do, and it's a high risk pregnancy. And that is, I think that's a point that is often forgotten in the infertility community, that I know that we've heard from many members in the community, if they have been able to conceive and been able to give birth, that those around them sometimes give the impression that all of their desires have been fulfilled and that it should just be rejoicing, right? But often that whole pregnancy and often the delivery is very high risk. And there are a lot of moments of suffering and pain. And of course, not everyone's experience is exactly the same, but even after, though, as you explained, that there is not only physical healing, there could be potential continued trauma for both mom and child. And like this spiritual healing of God, what are you doing? And what did you do? And what does the future hold? And I'm just so grateful for your story that I think really just about anyone in the community could relate to a different portion of your story. And how grateful I am for you to share that we have this opportunity to see how God can redeem all things and how just all the consolations, which, as I'm sure you said, in it, you're not necessarily realizing like this is Jesus offering this, but even the smell of the oil that isn't supposed to have a scent, but that there's these beautiful moments that Jesus is present to us in that. And so I just want to give a really big heartfelt thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah, no, of course. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share it. Truly, I tell Dominic, that's my husband, all the time. I'm grateful for the moments that I get that I really, truly did not think I was going to get. I was knocking on death's door. I think when you're going through infertility, that having the baby, getting pregnant, having a child heals the wounds of infertility. And for some women, it might. But I think the fact of the matter for a lot of women is that it doesn't, because those wounds are really deeply rooted, whether it's in your identity as a daughter of God, whatever the wound may be, it's rooted in more than just infertility. And it really takes a lot of willing participation with God to let him heal it. And it's not just you desire a baby, so that desire is fulfilled, but the wound is not healed. And that's a really important thing. And it's not going to happen overnight. Like, it takes time, and it takes you being willing to really let God heal that wound before it's going to be fixed. Otherwise, it's just going to resurface when you're carrying a different cross. It'll keep coming up until you really invite God to heal it. Yeah. So I'm hopeful that our story will help others not feel alone in it. I really feel like God wants to use this story for his glory, but also just to help, like I said, help other people not feel alone and we're all in this together. We're all on this
Yes.
pilgrimage.
Yes.
And you don't have to do it alone. There is a village out there for everybody to help them get to heaven and to help them carry their crosses.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, as I prepare to sign off, listeners, this will not be the last that you will hear from Katie. But I love that sentiment that we can close on, that it truly is an honor to walk with this community. And that's what our stories do, is walk with each other, and to be able to not by sharing our stories, we're not saying that your story is the same as mine, but that God is working through all of it, and that He's present in all of it, and that we can walk with each other to heaven, just as you said. And I just want to reiterate that, and listeners know that wherever you are, whether your story has similarities to Katie or it looks very different, that we're here for you and we're walking with you. And it's an honor to hear your story as well. And so if you would like to get in touch with us, or if you like to talk to Father Paul, sometimes when we hear stories and we recognize these feelings, or as you said, Katie, these wounds that perhaps we're still needing some healing for, they come up in our hearts. And Father Paul, our spiritual father, would be happy to talk to anyone who maybe would like to process their story or seek some healing spiritually. So once again, Katie, thank you so much. And listeners, we'll see you next time on the podcast. God bless. Thank you so much for joining us for this Springs in the Desert podcast episode. We would be so grateful if you took a minute to rate and review us so that we can reach more listeners. Don't forget to check out our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram, and go to our website, springsinthedesert.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter and community prayer list, read our blog, and register for virtual and in-person events. Most importantly, remember that God loves you so much, and so do we.